So this is the Nagog Hill Orchard Ad Hoc Working Group meeting for January 19th, 2022. We're going to begin this meeting. We have a few agenda items. We're going to recap our previous meeting. We're going to have group member and staff updates. We're going to have an update on the orchard pruning RFP. We will review and discuss the RFP for the orchard, and then we're going to review our action item calendar, discuss next steps, and improve the meeting minutes from our previous meeting. So we will begin with a recap of the previous last meeting. I don't know if Joe, if you want to dive into this or.
Sure. Thanks, Cindy. So, we basically just discussed, and this is probably more for the watching public, whoever watches us, our recordings. We had met previously with the select board, and then discussed that meeting and next steps at our meeting last week on the 12th. And also finalized our request for quotes for pruning and to get that taken care of. So it's a rather short meeting. Basically, we adjourned, I believe, after half an hour, and identified next steps, which one of those big ones is the RFP that we're going to be starting discussion today. Just to sort of roll right into sort of like a staff update. Last night, the Finance Committee did consider the reserve fund transfer. As everyone knows from our joint meeting with the select board voted to approve the reserve fund transfer for $35,000 for pruning, as well as some consulting activity that was also reviewed by the Finance Committee last night and approved. So at least necessary paperwork to allow for this next stage is all in order, and then can give, once we get to the topic as far as update on the pruning RFP, can provide everyone with a little bit more of an update.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joe. So we will start with group member updates. I'll start with Jen Clancy to see if she has anything to share.
Actually, Amy and I had a great visit. I'm going to defer to Amy for a lot of the, she's better at those details than me, but Joanne DiNardo is an absolute rock star for what she is doing. It's unbelievable what she's held together, and what she shared with us was basically when the approval came for Sholin Farms, all of a sudden she was kind of left holding the bag, and she's been in charge of an unbelievable amount of real estate
responsibility.
Yeah, she's been like a one-woman show, and they have these friends of Sholin Farms that help out, but she's been the glue that's clearly held it all together. So she was very forthcoming with her time, and any questions that Amy or I had, she was great in sharing information.
That's
so wonderful. I don't know, Amy, if you want to jump into specifics or.
Yeah, so it's pretty typical for there to be sort of like this one crusader who sort of like steps up and says like, someone needs to do something about it, and I'm gonna like really lead the charge on this. And Joanne was that person who just like really rose to the top and sort of has stayed with it over the decades. So one of the things that I found really impressive about Sholin Farms was how well they have utilized the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture grants and USDA grants to make some really nice upgrades to the property. So for example, they capitalized on a grant to get solar panels in on some of their infrastructure. So they built, I'm gonna loosely refer to it as almost like a pole barn, not even a pole barn, like a pole structure. So it's covered, it has solar panels on top, and underneath, that's where they do all their chemical mixing and they hold their chemicals. And it's driven through solar. So I was like super impressed, and it really meets a lot of like the OSHA compliances. And it's sort of away from, I mean, it's in the orchard, but it's not sort of on the main thoroughfare. So it's sort of like away from where you'd find a lot of pedestrians, so to speak. Another grant that they used, the USDA, was to get a deep well paid for. So I was really impressed with that. Another thing that I was really impressed with was just like the appearance of the orchard. Everything was like so neat, so clean. They did have, I guess I'm going to just refer to it as like a garage of speaks, where they have tractors that are covered in the wintertime so that preserves they don't deteriorate as much. So they're not out in like the tough weather. They had a, not an all-terrain vehicle, but a utilitarian sort of terrain vehicle that they could use around the farm. That was paid for through the Central Mass Community Foundation, which gave them $1,000 to buy that sort of vehicle for everyone to sort of zip around the farm in. They had also done a really nice job of integrating sustainable practices on that property. So they had taken, their property is much bigger than ours. They're, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but close to like was it like 190 acres?
Yeah, they had a bit more, and I think one of Amy's points she's making here is that they got an awful lot of help with grants, but I think the question we all still have too is, you know, being a municipality as we are, as opposed to a friends of like Shoalin Farms, we may or may not be able to reach out for any of those grants.
Yeah, yeah. I guess my point is they were able to use government funding to make some really nice improvements. They had taken about 40 acres and they had created some just more wildlife habitat, put in native pollinators to sort of rebalance the ecosystem as one of their sustainable practices. Another thing that I was really impressed with about this orchard, and the Nagog orchard is also similar, and Jen reminded me that I guess I'm not as much of a trail walker as I thought I was, but while we were there, there was a nice parking lot and there were people who were coming to walk their dogs, a group of women who went to like walk the property for passive recreation. So it was just really nice to see the orchard being enjoyed year round outside of their crop production time. And that people were really welcome. So it gave it a lot more of a community feel. It also connected to some other trails that they had in Leominster. Another thing that I found really, well, actually, one of the challenges with having a nonprofit sort of model on top was that, and I think this is pretty common for nonprofits, and I think it's made even worse through COVID, is they're having a hard time finding like new board members to take on the work because it is so much work. Joanne is essentially the unpaid executive director. They are fortunate enough that Joanne, worked for Verizon for decades and doesn't need to work and doesn't need to be paid. So is able to sort of essentially work unpaid full time as the unpaid executive director / president of this board. But they're finding it hard to find like new board members. And so my concern for them, is that they're in a real place of transition. And this is not an unusual thing for nonprofits. Another thing that's a challenge for them right now, which is kind of a concern in terms of that nonprofit municipal model, is that there are some real investments that need to be made at this farm. And so they are looking to the city of Leominster, which is, a city of 40,000 people. Littleton is obviously much smaller, to start making some, not just upgrades, but like replacing things that have through normal wear and tear that have happened. So that's a big conversation that the city of Leominster has to have with Shoalin Farms. Let's see, what else can we say, Jen? We met two of the most awesome pruners ever at the farm. Which I had run over to Joe. We learned that the sign of a well-pruned tree is if you can throw a cat through it. And so we were just like, that's hilarious. So we were like, okay. So we learned something about pruning. I'm hoping they will complete the RFP bid process for pruning, because they're working at Shoalin Farms and they have another job set up in Rhode Island, and they live up in Maine in Vermont. So hopefully they can fit us in and do the work, because they're doing an amazing job over there. Another thing that I found really impressive about that property was they did integrate berries into the property just to diversify the crops and some earned income through the season. So they're a really amazing organization. I'm not sure I'd really recommend the nonprofit model for this. It comes with its own, running a nonprofit comes with its own natural challenges. The for-profit model might be a much better model for us. Yeah, that's my summary.
Yeah, I think really what it showed us in a nutshell is it's a different sort of setup than I think we can ever have. I mean, we can take nuggets away from what we saw, but it will be really interesting for us to see when we send out our final RFP, what we get back for ideas. But I just don't think we have the resources to go that route, both the manpower and the financial resources. So for me, that's kind of was my takeaway was, while I think it's fantastic what they were able to do, I don't think we are even close to doing something like that with Nagog Hill Orchards.
Yeah, and again, it really starts with someone who steps up as the crusader. So it really comes from this moment of like passion that drives the desire to start a nonprofit to make impact and change. And we're just in a very different situation. So I wouldn't recommend that model.
Right. And Amy, I concur with you, and I'm glad you all had an opportunity to see another facility. I do not believe in, Joe, this is something that I think we should look into, is that I do not believe a nonprofit that is a leaseholder can apply for grants for infrastructure finances. I would love to think they could, but I don't know that they can. So going forward with a municipal holder, but I think that's something we should look into down the road. Amy, you're spot on in terms of the volunteer kind of drought. It's been going on for at least 2 decades. So it's been something that all the national boards of philanthropy and everything have been talking about. People want to be able to come in, have one task and go home. They don't want to make a commitment. I sat on many boards where you had to make a 3-year commitment. I mean, people are happy for a 3-month commitment right now. So, but I'm glad that you all had that opportunity.
Yeah, and I think COVID has made it all the worse, for sure.
That's great. I'm so glad that you both took the time to go out and meet with Joanne and check out that organization and operation. I think what you brought back to us is really helpful. So thank you.
And we
so
took
much
her out for
doing
lunch,
that.
so
we
we actually had a great time. It was
That's
a
great.
pleasure to do
That's
it.
nice. Good. Thank you so much. Okay, group member updates. I know, Mr. Glavy, if you have anything to share.
No, nothing other than the FinCom vote last night. Other than that, we've all seen each other last week, and that was all good.
Excellent. Thanks. Sarah?
No, I don't think there was anything on my task list.
There
So,
was not.
okay.
Will, I know that you had sent over one name to Joe as somebody we might consider for a consultant, but I didn't know if you had anything else to share as well.
I did look a little bit into the deer fencing. Wellscroft fencing is out of New Hampshire. I'm not sure on the town. And they had a fencing calculator and stuff on their website. I didn't get too far into it, but they looked like they were a commercial installer. That's just as a resource. But other than that, that's all. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks. I don't have anything new to share. Worked a lot on the RFP draft that you all received over the weekend. And so after we get an update on the pruning RFP, we will discuss the RFP that I circulated to the group. So do you have any updates for us, Joe, about the pruning RFP?
Sure. It definitely has been posted, I heard John Clement had put it on one of the listservs for orchards that he's familiar, because I got two calls, one out of New Hampshire. The other was was 508, so Massachusetts number. Just inquiring as far as they came across it in an online listing, just to get a little bit more information as far as what we were looking for. I did talk to the Vermonters, and they're going to be stopping by. Anticipate tomorrow to pick up a hard copy and fill something out. They also are going to just send some additional information to me. Met out today at the orchard. Another tree company had actually asked to walk it and had some questions for me. So I met them out there. And when I pulled up, there was another truck that was sort of on the side, and someone had probably just recently got back into the vehicle after maybe walking around. So it was another tree company that had lettering on the side of the truck. So definitely getting some interest. So there's about 8-9 people, firms or people that have gotten in touch with me over the last few days that it's been available. So hopefully we'll get some form of response on that.
That's great,
Nope.
Joe.
Joe, did you hear from Jared Byrne at all? From Berlin Orchards?
Oh, he wasn't available. No,
No,
he already
okay.
had given me a call and said he was already sort of overextended with what he was
Okay.
already managing. So
Okay.
That's great. That's good interest. So hopefully we'll get some formal submittals. That'd be wonderful. What's the deadline on that, Joe?
I put it at on Wednesday the 26th at noon time. So
Okay.
depending on when our next meeting is, I'll be able to at least have some preliminary analysis prepared for that.
Okay, that's great. Good news. Fingers crossed. We get some good submittals.
Yep.
Okay, so next on the agenda is the RFP. And this is basically the quote nuggets that we had talked about just putting together. It's a compilation of just portions of the RFP for discussion by the group. So I'm gonna, I guess I'll share my screen and I'll pull it up and we'll just go through it page by page. And some of the things you might not be clear about what I meant or what was highlighted, so we can have further discussion about that as well too. So hold on one second. And can everybody see that?
Yep.
All right, great. So scroll up. Okay, so this is just the beginning. This is page 1 of the RFP. I thought it would be great if we could insert a photograph of the orchard, just to give people a visual and just make it a little bit more attractive and personable to anybody. We changed this first sentence. Jen worked a lot with me on this, just to try to make it not so, I'm going to say legalese, full of legalese. A lot of it read like a legal document. So we tried to soften it a little bit. And one of the things that we did was thanking people for their interest, just starting with that opening statement. Jen had come across this language about COVID, which I thought was really great to incorporate into the RFP. I don't know if people have any thoughts about that one way or another, but I thought it was really useful and something that we should definitely incorporate. And then the next highlighted section is just a background information about the orchard itself, just giving a little bit more detail about, Littleton, where the orchard's situated, the history of the orchard. A lot of this whole piece right here was pulled from the existing orchard. The buildings themselves I had put here, we need to confirm. I just want to confirm the actual buildings that are on the property at this time that will be part of the RFP. So I highlighted that. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you just confirmed one thing. The underlying base here, the part that's not highlighted, is essentially the language from the RFP of a year ago. Is that right? Or
Right.
okay.
Right. So anything highlighted is new.
Yep.
or
The,
it's something to be discussed, but anything that's not highlighted is part of the original RFP.
Okay. The description of the history of the property, we didn't have anything like that in there before?
No,
No, that's
Nothing.
good. That's a good
Actually,
addition then. Yep.
yeah, actually, no, and it wasn't. Yeah, no. We have descriptions of it elsewhere, but it wasn't really anything in the RFP itself, so. So that's all new, or this might be similar to what was in there. I can't really remember.
It was
Paul,
more
now
on
that
the
you say it.
lease itself, you know,
Right.
the legal stuff at the end where it went into a little more detail, but we thought that just giving an overall scope would be a nice intro, just a softer intro.
No, I think it's an improvement. I'm seeing it in there and seeing it new. I'm saying, boy, if that wasn't there before, it should have been.
But Paul, I think it wasn't there because when we first went to bid, Charles was already kind of in the pocket. So it was a known versus there weren't
Yeah,
many people coming forward. So
And we did have an expectation that it was going to be his son applying for it.
right. And I have to say, I commend the language that has been put forth because it is, I mean, ultimately, we're looking for a partnership here. So I really enjoy seeing the changes.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Sarah.
the only thing that I might consider adding is just a little bit of market research, which could probably be pretty easily pulled from the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Census
Amy, are
information.
you referring to traffic data or population data? When you say research, that's such a broad term. How do you quantify that?
Yeah, so I think traffic data and just population data is great, or the number of households in Littleton. I think what I was getting to more was just a little bit more about like how many orchards might be within like a 30-mile radius.
Also, Amy, what you might want to see is what the growth pattern has been. I think that would speak volumes, so that if you even looked at the last 5 years to decade, you'd see the opportunity for growth of that, what we call the 128 and 495 belt.
Yeah, I'm just making the assumption that, obviously there'll be people who see this who are very local, within, several towns out from us, but this RFP could reach as far out as Washington State, which obviously is a big apple producer, and they don't have a lot of information, right? So I think just to kind of balance the people who are local who are reading it versus the people who might be, out in Washington State.
I would suggest it's a good idea to have that information ready at hand. But that's something, if there's somebody interested enough to check in, that might be the sort of data that Joe keeps on hand for people that call in. It's worried that if the RFP becomes too dense and too long, you might lose people just on that alone.
Paul, what about submitting it as an opportunity for an addendum? So if somebody wants it, or you just hyperlink it to somewhere else. If you want more information on this area,
that's fine.
So that way it's not in, I agree. Less is more, but at least send them, if they wish to go read, they can find it.
About Littleton and we could even drive them to the town website, so.
Yep.
But yeah, it's not a bad suggestion, just giving a little more detail. It's a good point, Amy, for people who aren't familiar with the area. But we'll find balance between including that information and not overloading the document.
Agreed.
The other thing that I did add in here was the visual that Joe had produced about the fields. And it listed it here, field 1 through 14. That was produced by the Google Maps. I think that's a really good visual, in addition to the visual that is referenced in the preceding paragraph. I think the one thing that we need to do, though, is differentiate out how much of that property is now in conservation, because I know not all of it is part of the quote orchard. So that needs a little bit more refining, if you will.
Cindy, can I ask, as a point of reference, is that Google map dated?
It's the USDA map.
Okay.
Yeah.
Aerial photo USDA map.
Perfect. I don't want to reference a Google map without a date stamp on it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. This is something, existing conditions. This would be a new addition to the RFP. It's been, I saw it in other RFPs that I came across, and it was just really, and this is all needs to be added, is a description of the buildings, the equipment on hand, the irrigation system, the well, water quality. I don't know if we want to include that, soil conditions. I know I did receive reports from the highway department, although I cannot decipher those documents. That's not my wheelhouse to see if they're useful or not. And then assets not part of this RFP and permitted uses were things to consider to be included. And I wanted to get the group's feedback on those additions of those categories.
So I'll go first because I think I feel very strongly about this. I am very concerned of what we put as an asset and existing conditions without ready professional acknowledgement. So I know, for instance, that some of the irrigation systems you walk by, you can see that some of the drip systems are pulled up. So and equipment, unless we can really state the working manner of the equipment, I would really, most of these outside of the building and permitted use, it makes me uneasy because I don't want to stand behind something that we don't have data on. That's all I have to say.
No, that's a good point. Any other comments?
We can solve that by, or take a stab at it, something to think about. Just put a disclaimer in, just say, to the extent that we know, blah, 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 however,
Yeah,
What-
Paul,
what
we're trying to create a partnership. I don't want someone to go in and we say we've got a 1960 something tractor that we think runs and it doesn't run, or it's not
Well,
there.
that's why I say that, just say we have some equipment that, may or may not work. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, I don't, yeah, yep. I
I would
differ.
encourage the group not to guarantee weather or equipment functionality.
Thank you, Will. I agree.
I agree as well.
Okay,
I'm not disagreeing. Just saying you should mention we have these things, but not guarantee anything. That's certainly.
Right, and soil conditions can change so rapidly. I would exclude that. Someone is welcome in an RFP if they wish to come in and test or something to see. And Will, this is where I would defer to you if there's, obviously nutrient values or something, but I don't, if somebody wants to come in and test and give them a 7 to 14-day turnaround for testing, that's fine. But I certainly would not want us to incur the expense or the time to come up with the soil conditions.
I
okay,
think along with what Paul is suggesting, the ideal candidate is going to know what they're looking at by site. If we wanted to go along with individual interest on a particular piece of equipment, specifically stated that can they use this? Will this be at the property? That would work. But
Well, I mean, obviously there might be some things like the big boxes that apples were put into, but I think we're showing this property in the winter time. And so they're going to have to use their imagination cap when they're looking at obviously irrigation and soils and topography they can see, but yeah.
I think snow
Yeah,
coverage is
without-
gonna create an issue.
Right, so all the
without
more reason
recent
to
production
take it off.
data, they should just bid accordingly. It's obviously something which they're trying to create a partnership, and it's a growth opportunity, but they're kind of starting with, what you see is what you get, and there's no guarantees on any of the equipment or the production. And that kind of pushes it towards somebody that really, with their eyeballs, knows what they're looking at and knows what they're getting into. It puts kind of the onus back on them.
Well, that was a really nice comment that you might make, and I don't know, Cindy, if you want to try and incorporate that, as it is truly a growth opportunity. So if we comes back to that partnership and legacy and heritage and that, so stating the obvious, I know.
okay, so let's do this. So let's take out water quality and soil conditions. Do we all agree on that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, you take it out, but if we
Can
have
we-
data on hand and we're trying to make a partnership with somebody, shouldn't we say to them, look, you're welcome to take a look at the data we do have, but we encourage you to make your own conclusions.
Right. I
Yeah,
mean,
but Paul, we
I don't
don't
even
have
know if,
data. We do
we
not
do.
have soil data of all the
Well, yeah, we
fields.
do.
so
Of
what
have a
we
every
recent soil
single
test?
plot. So plots have to be taken, Will, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're looking at soil plots that are taken like every 100 yards.
The general data should be on file at the USDA office as to what the general type of soil is, to give them an idea of kind of a profile.
But
But
we've
as
already
far
got
as-
that on
So
hand.
wait, so
That's what
if I can say
Paul,
one
I
thing,
don't know
we're
that we
looking at
do.
two different things. So
Yeah.
you have historic data, which is geologically based, versus you have agricultural wellness data of what's missing, what needs to be added. So I guess we need to clarify, are we looking at the historic piece that's been there for hundreds of years, or are we looking at what's current in terms of like topsoil and layers? So
Yeah.
Paul, I think that the data that you might be saying is the soil that's been there for a very long time, which is known to Littleton, versus what is agricultural, what's in there for nutrients and
Yeah.
what's lacking.
I'm
Yeah,
talking
you
about what the highway department came up with
Yeah.
when they were doing their own testing for their own work at the road. So
Right.
if it's sitting in a file somewhere, they're welcome to look at it for
Yeah,
what it's
but
worth.
I don't think I mean, I don't mean to, the highway department are not experts on running agricultural soil tests, in terms
Nobody-
of measuring the
nobody should be
phosphorus,
claiming
the
they are. Okay,
nitrogen, the
that's fine.
organic material.
Yeah, so that was my whole point. What I stated earlier is I don't know if what we have is useful or is something that we do want to produce. I personally just don't know, looking at it, if it is of any use to anybody. It might not be. So,
I think we're going down a big rabbit hole here.
yeah, so,
I really think, with the exception of buildings and equipment, I don't know, does anybody have an actual answer now as to what is left there for equipment? I think we should assume there's no equipment.
I agree.
I just don't think there's gonna be anything there. The buildings are there. That's the only thing that's there. That, the irrigation system, we don't even know if it works. I would agree with Sarah. We've got snow. Nobody's gonna be able to walk and see that. it's almost like an as is.
I agree. You can see the pipes, you can see some of the tubing systems. Obviously, if there's wooden pallets that are there and things like that. And when someone's ready, I think, Joe, you're gonna have to go in and tag things that belong to the town. I think there's a lot of things that don't exist anymore just through attrition. I mean, some of those, you look back at the original equipment list and it was back 60s, 70s.
right. So if I may just for a minute though, well, what about the existence of the well and the existence of an irrigation system? They do exist.
Sure.
We
Well,
just can't-
no,
we can't-
you have a well that you think is working, and you have an irrigation system that could be dysfunctional because
Right, but the thing
it
is-
did not work. So I would say that there are segments or parts of an irrigation system that may be utilized, like the metal pipes, but the tubing is, I would not want to put my name on it.
I wouldn't either. I just think we're opening a can of worms with that.
But I just want people to know that they're there.
Well, you could just say as is.
I
Will,
I think
I
it may
think you
be
need, this
it
is
may
where
be
Will, I
important.
think, can help us a lot in terms of.
maybe important to clarify that the equipment that's there is available for the person to use. But for example, that there's not, sections of pipe that are rented or leased from someone else that's going to disappear. That we're going to have to do an inventory of what's there. I came across the paperwork that has the original equipment inventory and gives a place to start to go through it if Joe wanted to, go through and identify what was still there. But just clarifying that the prospective leasee would have access to what's there, but as Jen's saying, it's, as is how it is. There's no guarantees expressed or implied.
Exactly.
And I think that's what Paul was getting at, was that if there's things there that are useful, they're welcome to use them, but
Yep.
there's no guarantee with any of it, because we don't want them to come back and say,
Right.
there was X number of feet of irrigation pipe, and we didn't know we didn't have a water source, so we can't pay the lease payment because we had a drought and the apples got decimated.
You know what?
Can I
So
be the devil's advocate here for a second, because I've done enough leases and been on both sides of the fence. So Will, you take over a farm, there's 200 sections of old pipe that are there. They're not going to work. Are you now responsible for it? So at the end of your tenancy, are you going to have to be the one that gets rid of it if we didn't inventory it? So I just want to make sure that if we're developing a partnership, at some point we need to be able to say, yes, there's this many sections of pipe or whatever. Just like we don't know, at some point there may be old chemicals or pesticides or something. I just want to make sure that the next person is coming in with a clean slate in order to build this partnership. And so that obviously doesn't have to be in this particular document, but I think we as a committee have to be diligent to do our discovery to make sure that we're setting someone up for success.
I agree with you. And I personally, we do need to inventory the equipment. I don't know what's there. So we need to find that out and at least have that information available. We can talk to council too about how to word the language. If we do decide, because I get your points. I just, in looking at it, I think that if we're putting out an RFP for this property, there are buildings on the property, there's equipment on the property, there's a well on the property, there's some form of an irrigation system on the property. We need to at least say that in some shape or fashion, just to let people know that it does exist. And we just need to firm up how to deal with the condition of those elements.
And I think that's where legal counsel will come in, and for many things it's just as is. So, but the fact is we need to be able to say, because we don't know if Charles bought more equipment and put it in, we need to know if we have access to that or not.
Right. No, I know. All right. So that's what we'll do with this. We'll do more diligence. We just need to get more detail with this, have town council take a look at it, give us their recommendation.
Can we say may or may not be functional?
Yeah.
No, I think, Will, I think I would defer to you. I mean, our statement.
You know what, honestly, Sarah, I'm going to defer to legal counsel on how to word that. I don't, so I don't.
Most of them will just say as is. That's usually what council does.
All right, so we're going down a rabbit hole on this.
Yeah.
So I highlighted those in blue. We're going to defer to legal counsel on that. Assets not part of this RFP.
Are there any?
Well, there's parts of the property there that's part of conservation.
Oh, right. We talked about listing X number of acres, because if somebody looks at that big a plot and says, oh my God, I don't want to have to maintain all that. If we say, well, 27 acres is under conservation, you're not responsible to maintain that.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, it is true. And because if you look back at the legal description up here about the number of acres,
Yep.
you look at the size of the property, it's really not, you're not being asked to maintain or operate that amount of land because some
Right.
of it's in conservation and protected.
Can I ask a question? Is there a way for us, Cindy, in that original to just take that out? The land that they're not responsible for?
I think, well, I don't know. Because if you
Because
look at the legal description of the property, Sarah,
Yeah.
though, that is included in the legal description of the property.
The
But
parts
if,
ag,
but if the tenant does not have control over the property,
Mm.
it shouldn't be in this lease.
The description of the property that was deeded to the town includes those parcels. That's why I included it in there.
Yeah,
And
no,
it was
I
part of the-
get it. It's just super
I s-
confusing for someone.
right,
But I
if you,
think-
if,
I
can we
think we
make a
can-
bold statement somewhere that says, this RFP is not inclusive of lots 1, 2, and 3 because those fall under conservation. But to your point, Cindy, they need to see the whole property, but hey, you're
Right.
not responsible for this piece.
It's a point that ought to be addressed somewhere there, but again, I think this would fall in similar to what Cindy was saying earlier. I want to sort of think, give a note to council saying, here's an issue that's come up. We want to make sure we address, what property is in there and is not. And I would say related to that is the, depending upon who's responding to this RFP, you might have folks that want to live on site and be at that, and include the building, the home. And you might have people who have live within a neighboring town and want to run the operation and don't want to live there. So that's a negotiable. I mean, it ought to be spoken to somewhat there. I mean, these things are all available, but some of it's negotiable and some of it you don't have any control over.
Right.
The,
right.
I think the pumping station may be located on the conservation area. So there may need to be a arrangement for the people to pass, not a right of way, but the ability to pass and repass over it if they're able to use the pumping station. I'm not
Okay.
sure about that.
Okay. Okay, and permitted uses, I was just gonna put in the ag restriction language in this section. Does anyone have thoughts on that?
Isn't that covered? Isn't
I
that
don't know, did we cover
covered?
that somewhere else, Jen?
I think we did.
Okay, all right, so I'm gonna take that out. I think you're right.
I think
Just
we
a
did.
quick question about the housing. If someone were to not want to live in the house, are they then responsible for the maintenance of the house? I mean, you can't just leave a house, empty. Like who would live there and make sure that there's no flooding and pumps aren't freezing and not-
I think that came up later on when we talked about if somebody was not going to live there, would they be interested in subleasing?
Okay.
I think,
Yeah.
didn't we add that in, Cindy? I think down towards the end of the document before we got into
Yeah, it was
the
subleasing
actual.
any portion of the property. Yeah, that's something that we need to further discuss, Amy.
Yeah, and then the board members might have opinions on that too. I mean, if people who end up being the best candidate for using the orchard are not interested in the home, well, the town may well want to maintain that, as and be in charge of it that way, rather than give it to somebody to include as a sublease here. We're unwittingly, we're in that situation
Could
right
the
now
home-
and didn't know it, so.
Right,
I mean, honestly, it'd be an awesome office for someone that's really just trying to run it as well. It doesn't
That's
have to
what-
be, doesn't have to be residential.
right.
So, but yeah, no, I mean, if you're running the farm, I mean, that whole first floor, you can see everything.
Well, that's what Charles's office is,
Yeah.
it has a great windows view that, yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
would expect people to be interested in it, but you may get someone who already has another operation in another town and that's not what they, that's really not their thing. And it,
Right,
it might
So-
serve another purpose for the town and relieve that potential user of one headache they weren't looking for.
right. So let's,
It
all right.
depends, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll further discuss that when we get to that point.
Yeah. Hey,
And-
Cindy,
Yeah,
mind if I just jump on something Paul just said, because I was going to raise it later on, but I think some of the questions that we're going through, sort of maybe this just for me to chime in on this right now. Oops, why is can I just take over control of sharing the screen for a quick sec?
sure.
So one of the things, and I was actually brainstorming with Anthony today about this, is And we were talking about, how do we sort of try to help the board and the working group to sort of get an idea as far as what are some potential uses. And I had forgotten about this. I actually did something like this in a previous town that I worked. Instead of doing an RFP, we had done a request for interest. Basically, it's a high level. It just summarizes the property. And I just did a quick Google search so I could show you something because I couldn't find the one that I had worked on in Wayland, where we identify the property. We identify, we're looking to see what people would propose. So right now we're trying to guess a lot of things that people may respond and how to evaluate. But another tool that we can do is this request for interest, where we basically say, almost like when you're putting out a real estate listing, we have this property, we're looking for ideas, here's some of the constraints, respond back within this time frame on things you think you may want to use the property for. What that allows for is then for the town to be a little bit more specific as it drafts the RFP, so that we're not trying to encompass everything, but we've started to engage people so that they can focus in on, well, here's an idea that I'd like to do and think that might work. And it could be someone that wants to run an orchard. It might be someone that wants to run other types of programs, and allows us to sort of narrow things down and provide a little bit more focus, rather than trying to sort of build out this RFP that then almost tries to encapsulate everything. And it can just be a little bit more strategic. It doesn't need to be as sort of encompassing that typically RFPs are.
Right. So I appreciate that, Joe. I kind of addressed that further on in this, some of the suggestions in here. So I'd like to just, keeping that in mind, just get through this, what is before the group right now. So this was, and this is basically going to kind of speak to what Joe just brought up, maintenance responsibilities. So one of the things that I was thinking of is, as far as future use of the orchard or a potential partnership with somebody, are there parts of the orchard that we want to make sure are retained as an orchard? Specifically in this example would be fields 4 and 5. Do we want to make sure that those are retained as an apple or a fruit orchard? As opposed to have somebody come in and they give us a proposal and all of a sudden, the picturesque part of that property is no longer those pretty trees. They've decided to take the trees down and plant something else there that still falls within agricultural uses. So do we want to identify specific areas in the town that we expect to be maintained and preserved as an orchard itself? So that was orchard fields was the first part of this maintenance responsibility, and stating that we expect the respondent to keep fields 4 and 5 and maybe 2 other pieces of the property fully productive, and what we mean by that. And then also with respect,
if I can ask a question, because Chuck brought up a good point, is that where the plums and peaches are over on the far opposite side of Nagog Hill, from what I understand, they're very healthy. So if there's a way to keep this as a living document, so that, yes, we would love to have the 2 fields stay in apples, it may be that there's a committee that reviews, because what if all of a sudden something happens, if they have a disease that comes through or something. So I like the idea of maintaining history, but we also have to make sure that we're able to have a process, whether it's every 2 years or something, that someone that's non-partial can come in and look at that. But I do like the idea of the health of the nectarines as well.
right, and that's why I did field X and X, Sarah, because I remember Chuck mentioned that. I just couldn't remember which fields those were.
Yep, it's right by the Morrison's homestead, down across from the old barn, right on the curve.
Do you remember what number fields those were, Sarah?
I'm not working in my home office, so I don't have the field numbers, but I can get that to you.
Right.
Yeah. So I think my concern is that I like that we can look at this document from many different avenues.
Mm.
And I want to make sure that if someone comes in, they're vested in apples, and all of a sudden something happens, like in Florida, that the citrus groves have this canker that's decimating things. So is the onus on, so Cindy, all of a sudden my trees died. Do I have to replant new trees? You know, so I want to make sure that that we have that flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if we agree with this thought process, Sarah, we can definitely have council put in some language to firm up exactly what you just spoke to.
Yeah.
So, Paul?
Yep. One specific point relevant to the, I'm trying to keep you on the, keep on the track you're trying to keep us on, but I have 3 related points. So I was looking when I first read this earlier, where's the stuff that tells prospective respondents that they have some latitude in what they can propose, depending, you know, they might be coming, they might have 100 different parties coming from 100 different directions. And I think it's incumbent on us to lay out in broad terms what our expectations are, but also make it clear, look, this is protected agricultural property, and it has a history for the past 70 years anyways as orchard property, and we want to maintain large aspects of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, but the details about what field here and there, stuff that should really be in the lease negotiations, more or less. I mean, other than when we get into a dialogue with anybody who's seriously interested, you can tell them, well, we'd really like to keep the view shed here for people who are driving through it, and this is where the active pick your own has been, and these stone trees down here and something else that we would like to keep too. So, you know, would your proposal conform to that? And if so, well, then great, we work out a lease that covers all that. But to get real specific here, and, you know, maybe exclude somebody who says, well, gee, I have another idea for that field, but I'd like to preserve this and this. I'm not sure this is the place to get that kind of thing in there. So, you know, to pick up back on something Joe said earlier too, you know, we thought of that actually years ago in an earlier time when we were encountering this, before we knew Charles had a son who was going to be interested, about doing an request for information before we did an RFP. And I just think we can also accomplish a lot of the same goals in this RFP, because we're somewhat pressed for time. I don't think we have the luxury of time to do both an RFI and then an RFP to follow on it. I just think in this RFP, we can say, you know, we should make it clear that, look, you know, we have some boundaries here about what we want to achieve with in maintaining this property. Certain parts of the property we want to see in the agricultural use it's in right now. Others are wide open. Beyond that, there's a APR on the property, and if you don't know what that means, it means there has to be an agricultural use here. You know, so propose something to us that's within the bounds of what we're talking about, and you know, we can do that. But the more detailed pieces of that, I think it worked out on a one-by-one basis in the lease, in an ultimate lease with somebody.
Right. I mean, I'm big on setting expectations, Paul. And I just think as a group, do we want to say, you know what, there's plenty of other land there for other uses, but these are portions of the property that we really want to see preserved.
Yeah.
Not to say that we're not flexible, but somehow to word it so that we've kind of have an expectation, but we are flexible at the same time.
And it's a wording thing that I'm most, that catches my eye. It's like, here, if we're trying to speak to, there are things we want to protect as is, and there are things that you should feel open to be creative about.
Yeah, how do we?
And yet the headline is maintenance responsibilities.
Right. So
that doesn't, you know, there's nothing there that speaks to opportunity, you know, or flexibility. And I think that's
Paul, you just hit it on the head. Just go ahead and add opportunity, you know, opportunity, maintenance responsibility. So you're starting with a positive, right? So
yeah, you're right.
Yeah, we start with the positive.
But it's structured a little differently too here, Sarah. I mean, it starts off, I mean, sure, you can say that in the headline, but then it just goes into a list of the things we want.
Right. So what I would encourage, add your opportunities, Paul, and then just say we have the town has a another word for heritage or historic preference that we would like to see these two fields remain as apples, and then go into your next sentence. So yeah.
Right.
No, Paul, I think you hit it. Let's just start with a
Yeah.
positive and
Yeah, I'm just
just
gonna
one
add
more
that.
sentence.
Yeah, at the beginning, perhaps, just, since this is what's on the screen, start off with something like, we encourage all, creative, qualified applicants to think about this, how they would succeed with this orchard, but but there are aspects of the property and its history that we want to maintain, and, we're going to, we'll detail those as they are right here. So, be mindful that these are the things we want to protect in creating your RFP response.
Right,
I think, Paul, also, this is a nice place to have our town seal right there, which obviously shows the, apples are part of our history,
okay.
provided it's still in the town seal.
I don't think it is.
Well, that wasn't the town seal. That was
Oh.
the 300th anniversary logo.
Yeah,
Right, yeah, sorry, that's what I meant.
yeah. All right, so we'll change the language here. And then I'm just gonna do
Yes.
that.
There's some language further on, Cindy. You remember we tossed about a few things, and I think if we just all hang on and keep going to the end and see, I think some of these things we do address. Where
Yeah,
we,
you're right.
where we do
Expectations.
throw it out there and say, give us your background, tell us what you're thinking. I mean, that is coming. That's still in this document. We
right.
haven't even gone through the whole document.
Thanks,
I
Jen.
didn't have a long career as a newspaper man, but I did once upon a time. And one of the rules was you don't bury the lead. If that's your message, that should be up front.
All right, so let's go
On
through this
page
and
9.
we'll figure it out. Okay. Yeah, this is, need to discuss commercial. Town council had told me that we should consider just using the house for commercial purposes, but after talking to Jen and hearing feedback that she received, we can't.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
there's, I think too many people will be interested. The house is a huge gem for us.
Right,
It's a big plus for us in the RFP to have a house available.
right.
Sure.
So I'm gonna take that
Just
out.
speaking from a farming background, it's really whether it's a night watch person or just somebody on the premises. I would almost consider the house, somebody that was looking to occupy the house as a residence would almost have additional points in if there was a point scoring system.
We'll
Just to
get
have
there,
somebody
Will.
at the property.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a caretaker position.
Yeah, but we do have other, we've got the, what is it, the bunkhouse there too.
Right,
So with
Yep.
that, to have somebody be able to live there, we've got that opportunity there if they're not interested in the big building. But
in the big house,
whatever,
right.
yeah.
Okay, so I didn't know if we wanted to include pesticide management, and I don't know where I got this from, commercial composting and materials. Do you want to get into any of that?
I don't
I
think
think
we
it-
need to get into that. I mean,
It's in the
pesticide
lease.
management,
That's a lease item, I think.
right?
All right, I'm gonna take
But
that
I
out.
think, Paul, and Cindy, I think there was some language that we had from the previous lease that did say that a pesticide management and like fertilizing insecticide plan needed to be submitted. So as part of a response. So
Yeah, I
we
think
may not
That's in
need-
here.
it's further down.
It's
Yeah.
further
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, this is just something new. So I'm gonna take this out because no one is agreed to it. So this is expectations. This is something new. And I don't know if the group has any comments on this language, but
I think it's great. I think this is the language. I just think it should be somewhere earlier in the document.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounded like it should be when I read it.
Where would you put it?
Right?
Where could you put it?
Expectations? How about right off the top?
Yep.
okay.
or somewhere, in the other top.
Like it's, yeah, okay. And, okay,
While you guys are pondering this, I make apologies, but I am double booked. I have a Zoom that I have to help lead a meeting that starts in 2 minutes, so.
Oh.
I look forward to you giving me whatever you want me to do as action items.
okay, thanks, Sarah.
All right,
Bye,
sorry.
Sarah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yep, bye-bye.
Did anyone have any comments on A through F?
No.
Okay,
And that's where you've got the integrated test management stuff. It's already in there, right? See that?
Yeah, number C is
Right.
IPM,
That would be letter C.
or
Yeah,
C,
perform-
sorry, letter C.
Yeah,
I'm
and then-
hungry, Paul. I can't think straight.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then, sorry, so just in terms of keeping professional records, and maybe this is not the place for it, but I think just given previous history that the town might want to be like much more on top of things. Like, I don't know if there's like a reporting structure that we should put in place so the town is more ensured that things are going well.
right.
Like, what
So
is, like, the
one of the
oversight?
things is, yeah, so that is something that we definitely need to discuss, Amy. My thought process is, as far as annual reportings, it's just to keep this in line with the annual license renewals at the select board.
The timing of it, right?
Timing of it annually to integrate this in with that annually, and then to see also further down, it will talk about reportings and to see what reportings they have, what forms they have. And I think we do say in here that the town is willing to work with you and just have a further discussion about reporting requirements and forms to be submitted.
As we were going through the whole escapade with Mr. Auger the Younger, we ended up having counsel, but we spent a lot of money on counsel to draft language on that. That is in various iterations of the lease, but those issues didn't come up and become, that was part of the things we broke down in negotiations with him with Mark Auger, with those specific reporting requirements, because that was not something that was well addressed in earlier versions. We wanted to try to incorporate it.
Right,
So I would think some language along those lines saying, yeah, we're going to have some reporting expectations and record keeping that, and whatever that. But I would say you can find that language in the last version of the lease, because it was something
Right.
that Auger was balking at. Having it in the RFP, I think in some point is perfectly appropriate, just to let them know, if you're going to be coming here, our expectation is we're going to be looking for yield, sales numbers,
Yeah.
all the rest of it. If you're not comfortable giving that to us, then, too bad.
Can we say
And-
that,
and, yeah, inspections and all that sort of stuff.
can we say that we have those forms if they need them? Can we
I
get
think-
them? I mean,
Well, it's not
does
like-
somebody do a good job with that we can use their forms?
I think we can reference reporting and then handle that as part of like a lease negotiation. I mean, having them provide annual report to the office of the select board regarding whatever we wanted to have would maybe
no
all that
standard
would be.
form out there, if that's what you get. But I mean, we
Yeah.
already did come up with a list of the sort of things we wanted them to
Yeah.
report on. But
right.
which, if you can share that with, the last version of the lease, it might answer Jen's question and get the rest of us thinking about, whether or not we want to incorporate this in how much of that we want to incorporate in the RFP and how much we just save for the lease process.
Right.
It's
And there was
it's an important topic, that's for sure.
Yeah, there were some forms like that, Paul, that I had come across with respect to Church Meadows that I was going to try to dig out just as an example, but that's something definitely for further discussion that we need to firm up.
I mean, if somebody's new to it and says, sure, I'm happy to do it. What do you want me to do? Do you have a form you want me to fill out? I'll use your form. So I guess I just
Yeah.
want to have something ready if they ask. Yeah, here it is.
Yeah, we'll definitely have that, Jen. We'll definitely
Okay.
work on that and get that together. This is just a new heading only. This language is already in the RFP. The new language would be objectives. And then this is just for further discussion with the select board as far as the term of the lease, the length of the lease. So that's the only thing new is this highlighted section right there.
Cindy, did we end up further down in it, asking it as a question? You remember we talked about saying, what's your intent? What's your preference? 5-year, 10-year, 20-year, other? Did
I
we
think
add
that's
that?
further, I think it's further down here, Jen, I think.
Submission of,
Yeah, let's get through this and then figure out if we, because we did talk about that.
yeah,
Okay. This is format change. Only language this language is in the existing RFP. This is the non-price proposal and price proposal section. It was all just kind of lumped together. And so we just separated it out into different paragraphs, just to make it more readable. Because to me, it was just confusing the way it was worded before. So like I said, it's the exact same language. We just changed the format. And just really being able to break out the non-price proposal on Form A. And then,
can you highlight that or just bold it where it just says
Yeah.
non-price, just bold it?
I just, yeah, I
Perfect.
underlined it, yeah.
Perfect.
And then right here, yeah, and then right here, the price proposal for
Yep.
Form B.
Perfect.
So I'll just bold that. And this is what we're expecting us respondent to provide. Are all the attachments. This is a proposed revised Form A. And I wonder, Jen, if this is the correct version,
Name of applicant, contact person.
if other than applicant.
Yep, scroll, can you scroll down?
Yeah,
Current ag business. Yep,
yeah.
and then
so-
we added that on an attachment. Please describe your current ag business, including the ownership interest. And then it says, describe how Nagog Hill Orchard will be used in conjunction with your existing business.
right.
So that's Paul, to your point, that's kind of opening the door saying, hey, if this is going to be in addition to something you're already doing, how do you think they'll work together?
Yep, that's good.
Okay. And then this is the other thing too. So we stated that we're gonna select an applicant based on the our evaluation of who best meets the following criteria. And there's 3 sections. You know, the narrative provided, an insurance form of the lease, insurance, see the lease below, and outstanding financial obligations to the town of Littleton. This was in the existing lease. I don't know about including this. Or should it be not only the town, but maybe any municipality?
Yeah, that's getting a little personal. And I don't know if we can ask that.
Well, I think if it's a government body, yeah, I mean, I would ask council on that. I think the inclusion of that was council's
Because it's in the
request
existing,
anyways.
yeah, it's in the existing RFP. So I'll just highlight it in blue to talk to Tom about. I just found that an unusual question personally.
Yeah,
Um,
and then I know it might be, and again, I think this is something for town council to answer, but because the town might want to consider running a query check and a financial background check on the person who might ultimately take over the lease, just to reduce their risk and liability, just because you have so many kids running around the farm. It just might be something to ask town council about.
The quarry check, yeah,
okay,
it's actually a good point. I hadn't
Well,
even
both
thought
both
about
parts,
that.
but if we had, you know, some of the stuff about Mark Auger, I mean, we might have, granted, we were never under any contract with him, but it's sort of stuff that would have come out in the wash had we done a financial background check in addition
Right.
to, you know, so that's, you know.
Yeah, and I would
I-
only run it upon, like, you know, either them just you've identified someone and you've gone through a lot of negotiations.
Yeah, yeah, that would only be for
Decided-
somebody that you're in a final negotiation with. We're not asking
Right.
the world to supply that information. Yeah,
Yeah, it's at the very end.
Right.
Good
Okay, and
point.
so then the next part is the comparative evaluation. Personally, the advantageous, most advantageous, least unacceptable. I don't know. I don't think this is a good system, because my definition of advantageous might be different than Paul's. So I didn't know if we wanted to change it to a point system.
I think we should. Can you scroll down a little bit, Cindy?
Yeah,
So you see all that stuff, unacceptable, at least it just seems so in your face and not
It
like a
does.
partnership.
Right.
It's just those words are just very harsh. And I think points is just a little easier than, 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 4 point. And Cindy and I talked about too. So let's just say, the select board decides based on our recommendations, that they're going to go with this person. Well, what if somebody who didn't get selected comes back and says, hey, well, how did you score us? And if it's points, we can say, well, this person had 14 points and you only had 10 points. So
and
it
again,
just,
that's a council driven thing. They tell you to put this sort of stuff in here so that you aren't challenged later on. And
Right.
Personally, I have no problem switching to a point system. I just think we don't want to get hung up on our own scoring pattern. So at the end of the day, if you've got somebody in front of you who adds up well mathematically, and oh well, that happens to be the one you don't want, and the one you do want is great for other reasons but doesn't match up, you have to be careful how you score it at the end of the day. But having a system in place is
I mean,
should be a requirement.
unacceptable. It just sounds like, what if
Yeah.
somebody wants to try and they don't have
Right.
3 years, but they've got
Right.
enthusiasm. And if somebody told me that's
Or if they
unacceptable,
don't have any equipment, but they have the money to go out and buy it, that might even be better than somebody who has old equipment,
right?
right.
I mean, that
Yeah, and I think,
Paul is right in that we can come up with a different word than unacceptable.
Yeah.
But the challenge with points is that people add them up, and that criteria 1 may be weighted differently than criteria 2. But if you go to a point, people may view each of those equally. So it gives the town more flexibility to go with something like this, but we can easily say it's disadvantage, least advantage. We can use different words so that unacceptable is just replaced.
Okay.
yeah, and then I think, so my comment about, so I think there's sort of like 4 pieces of criteria. But when we go back to sort of like the expectations piece that we wrote about, or Cindy and Jen had so kindly wrote about and did such a nice job, it talks about maintaining the history of the orchard. It talks about education. It talks about community. And so, those ideas and those concepts aren't being evaluated, by a point system or whatever, and those aren't included. And so, I would like to see them included or find a way to evaluate them, because someone could come in and, maybe their points are really low in one section, but their education, their community drive is like so amazing, but there's no way to like capture that and evaluate that.
It's
I
right
think-
down here, Amy.
Yeah.
It's actually, these were other suggestions
Oh,
for
okay.
evaluations to be
sorry.
reviewed.
I take it
That's all
back.
right.
I think those should be elevated to criteria and given some strength too. And also just on the mathematical, and if we're going to get in, well, if we have 5 points to consider, you have more flexibility as a grader to weight it the way you want it to be weighted, rather than 3, you might be bound a little bit more, So if you added education and community engagement to the other 3 that are up above,
Yeah,
then you've got more areas, and then change the language so that there aren't harsh things, like what Joe was saying, unacceptable, get that out of there and have a different word for it. Then you're grading on 5 different criteria.
I gotta get my plug. Hold on.
So
You could
that's,
use-
somebody who's maybe run a different business and has community engagement, but doesn't own a tractor, so
Right.
it really just you know, it opens the net a little bit wider to see what people come up with. And I'm hoping that we get some really creative proposals here instead of just standard, yeah, I want to run the orchard and, you know, what else do you want to do?
Right.
What else would be fun? So, yeah, the criteria, and I can't scroll down because it's not my screen, but the other suggestions we came up with were pulled from other RFPs.
Yep.
Particularly the one from Essex. They had some awesome stuff, which is where a lot of these little nuggets came from, like this, or, you know, experience with food banks or organizations and volunteer days, farm days, and events like that. So it's.
So we'll add all this language in. Everybody's
As additional criteria.
As
for it?
criteria.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yep.
All right, good. And then what do we decide about kinder, gentler words, or as
I mean, you
opposed to?
could use
Someone
the
take a shot
criteria.
at it. I mean, I don't know if that's a group activity. Someone take a shot at it.
Yeah, I mean, you could use a criteria of like likely, more likely, very likely, almost like when you take a survey, like how likely are you to eat chocolate every day?
How satisfied are you?
Very likely, you know, like a scale like that. I don't know.
Who's got a thesaurus?
I was
Are
just
you
going to
still
say,
on that
I'm
crazy
so
diet,
diving into
Jen?
that thesaurus.
No, Amy, I finished that 2 nights ago. I had pasta and red wine last night. I'm back in heaven.
Awesome.
All right. I can't read all.
Would qualification work, like a entry-level qualification, you know, intermediate qualification and an advanced qualification?
Oh,
Wicked smart.
yeah. Would you say intermediate?
Go to Starbucks, they start with like, you know, best, even better than best, and even better than best, or whatever the hell, you know.
Yeah, you're gonna have to put it in Italian, Cindy.
Right.
Grande, super grande.
I'm looking at my thesaurus from
All right, go for it, Jen.
1978.
All right,
See,
All right, so we're good. So that's
Yeah.
pretty much the end of it. The lease piece of it, haven't even taken a look at that whatsoever. I just wanted to get through this.
Yep.
And try to refine up the RFP. So we'll do these edits and then we'll take another look at it. So I'll circulate it back to the group. So
Good.
we'll give it another run through.
Yeah, great though. I mean, you know, the stuff, it's not a major overhaul we're talking about. It's snipping and, you know, and whacking here and there. That's all.
Right, right.
the whole thing, to Cindy's point, was to make it more user friendly. When we first read the original document, it was just so harsh.
Mhm.
Right.
It was not a part, it was not like welcoming you to give us ideas. It was like, here's what we want.
But it wasn't written that way either.
That's, yeah.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
written rather specific. So here we need to open it up. We need to
Right.
try to get people
Well,
to
it-
think a
as I
little
think
bit
it was
more
Sarah
creative.
reminded us, you know, it was at the time that one was drafted, you know, the expectation was different than in the world that we're looking at right now.
Right.
Right. Yep. All right, good. So, all right, so I'll revise that. I'll circulate it again to everybody so we can take another look at it and have further discussion about it. And so next is to review the action item calendar. I don't know if there's been any changes from the last time we looked at it. I think we're still on target for our goals for the end of the month. And we can revisit the action item calendar once we enter into February.
Did we have a date that we want to have all these little things fixed on the RFP to actually get that RFP out?
It was the end of the month.
End of January, okay.
Yeah, but
Okay,
what we're gonna have to do, I think, was the end of the month. Now we have to bring it back to the select board and have them take a look at it
okay.
with our recommended changes. And I don't think that we had discussed an actual date for posting the RFP. I think we were gonna get it before the select board in February and then have that conversation.
Okay.
We make progress next week, you know, we're pretty, it shouldn't be too far off from what we're
Oh,
at right
no.
now.
Yeah, no, not at all. Yeah, I mean, I think we're doing great. It's
Yep.
January 19th. I think we're in really good shape.
I can't wait to
So-
hear about from Joe, all the RFPs. for
I
pruning he
know.
Back.
If we can line somebody up and get that pruning going, that's gonna be great.
Mm.
That'll be really, really good. Okay, next steps. So we're gonna revisit the RFP at our next meeting. I'll circulate changes based on what we discussed tonight. Hopefully Joe will have some amazing news for us. Lots of responses to the pruning RFP. And Joe, and do you want to circulate that document that you shared earlier in the meeting with the request, just so that we can, collectively just individually take a look at it?
Yeah.
That would be good.
Also, Cindy, if we're thinking about having a meeting next week to discuss RFP, is that something you want to ask? Because essentially we've had, a good 45-minute working session. We could always invite Jenny to attend to sit in if we needed guidance to try to refine things, if you think that would be helpful.
Yeah, what do you guys think? What does the group think?
If it's possible that we're that close to getting it done, why not?
Okay. Okay.
These are,
Now, Cindy, was your intention to work on some of this language with council between now and next week anyway?
Well, I mean, that's one thing that I could do is
Yeah.
just make the changes that we talked about tonight and just shoot it over to Jenny and just say, can you take a look at this and see what you think? As opposed to having her sit in on the meeting with us. That might be more productive that way.
That worked for me.
Seemed like
Okay.
if she needed to research something, it would be, it would make it more productive.
Right. All right. So let's do that then, because I highlighted the areas that we wanted to defer to council on. So I'll just send it over to her. And then the whole lease is another thing, but let's get through the RFP first and then we'll talk about the lease piece of it. So, okay, good. So those are our next steps. Do we have meeting minutes, Joe?
No, didn't get a chance to do those. One of the things I was going to do, because our last couple of meetings, except for this one, had been only half an hour. We've had 3 that have been really short. Whether or not there would be any members that might be willing to take a look at the video and just prepare some notes for meeting minutes, so then I can concentrate on the longer ones.
Who's our clerk? Is that- Sounds like it's Amy by the look on her face.
Can you do that, Amy, do you think, or?
Yeah.
All right, that'd be awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Joe.
so you just
Thanks
need
for
me to
saying-
go back to, I'll email you later, Joe, and just,
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joe, for asking, putting that out there. All right, so we will just plan on meeting, our next meeting on the 26th at 6 o'clock. And that concludes our meeting for this evening. Good
Motion
job,
to adjourn?
everybody. Motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
seconded.
Second,
All right, good. All those in favor, Jen,
Aye.
Amy,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
Will,
aye.
and Cindy is aye, and that concludes our meeting for this evening. We'll see everybody back on the 26th at 6. Thank you so much, Joe, for everything.